It wasn't supposed to be dramatic. There were no cameras outside, no security detail leaning against black SUVs, no crowd waiting with phones raised, just a narrow storefront on a quiet street, with warm light glowing through the windows and a small wooden sign that read, "Open." Inside, the bookstore felt almost hidden from the world. Tall shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. The air carried that familiar scent of old paper and polished wood. Soft instrumental music played low enough that you could hear pages turning, and behind the counter stood Steven Seagal, not in a suit, not in costume. Just a simple dark sweater, reading glasses resting low as he sorted through a stack of used hardcovers. He moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who wasn't in a rush to be anywhere else. Most people who walked in didn't expect to see him there. Some recognized him instantly and froze for half a second. Others looked twice, unsure if it was really him, but he didn't make it a big deal. If someone nodded, he nodded back. If they asked for a recommendation, he gave one. No speeches, no ego, no performance. This place wasn't about image, it wasn't about proving anything. It was quiet on purpose. Regulars said he liked the early hours best, fewer interruptions, more time to read, more time to think. Sometimes he would sit near the front window with a cup of tea, turning pages slowly, completely at ease. For a man known for intensity on screen, this version felt different, softer, controlled in a way that didn't need to be shown off, and maybe that's why the piece felt so real. Because no one expected tension to walk through that door. No one expected a voice loud enough to cut through the music. No one expected the kind of energy that shifts a room in seconds, but quiet places don't stay quiet forever, and sometimes the calmest rooms reveal the strongest reactions. For Steven, the bookstore wasn't a hobby. It was a shift. After decades in front of cameras, under lights, surrounded by expectations, he chose something slower, something quieter. A place where no one yelled action and no one waited for a perfect take. This wasn't about reinvention. It was about reduction. He kept the layout simple. History on the left wall, philosophy near the window, martial arts and Eastern literature in a small, carefully arranged corner that he personally curated. Every shelf had intention. Every title had a reason for being there. He didn't advertise the store as his. There were no posters with his name. No framed movie stills. If customers brought up his past, he acknowledged it politely and redirected the conversation back to books. "What are you reading lately?" he'd ask instead. That question mattered more to him than recognition. The regulars started to notice patterns. He opened early, closed on time, swept the floors himself, restocked inventory without delegating. When shipments arrived, he carried boxes inside without complaint. It wasn't about image control. It felt more like discipline applied to normal life. In the afternoons, he sometimes hosted small reading circles. Nothing flashy. Just 6 or 7 people sitting in folding chairs discussing ideas. No debates, no ego, just conversation. People who expected intensity were surprised by the patience. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was measured, calm, direct. There's something different about someone who no longer feels the need to dominate a room. And for a while, the bookstore became a kind of sanctuary, a neutral ground. Students came in after class, retirees lingered for hours. Writers used the back table near the poetry shelf as their unofficial office. The environment was predictable in the best way. Predictable means safe. Safe means calm. But calm only works when everyone respects it. The truth is, quiet places attract 2 kinds of people. Those who value the silence, and those who want to disturb it. Steven understood discipline. He understood boundaries. Running a bookstore might seem simple, but it still required structure. Respect the space. Respect the people inside it. Most did. But on that particular afternoon, something felt slightly off before anything even happened. It was subtle. The door opened harder than usual, not slammed, just pushed with unnecessary force. footsteps heavier than they needed to be, a pause at the entrance that lasted too long. Steven looked up from the counter for just a second, not alarmed, just observant, because when you've spent years reading rooms, you don't ignore shifts in energy. And in a place built on quiet, even a small disruption feels loud. The bell above the door didn't ring softly this time. It snapped. Sharp metallic sound that cut through the low music and the quiet murmur of conversation. A few heads turned automatically, not out of fear, just instinct. The man who stepped inside didn't browse the way most customers did. He didn't slow down to read titles, didn't glance at the new arrivals table. His eyes moved across the room quickly, scanning people instead of shelves. You could feel it. Not danger. Not yet. But disruption. He walked with purpose, heavy steps pressing against the wooden floor, the kind of steps that announce themselves. A silent challenge in the way he carried his shoulders, chin slightly raised, like he was already bracing for something. Steven looked up from behind the counter. No visible reaction, no tension in his posture. Just awareness. The man paused near the center aisle, hands in his jacket pockets. He turned slowly, taking in the customers sitting in the reading chairs, the older couple near the history section, the college student, flipping through a notebook. Then his eyes landed on the counter and stayed there. Most people who recognized Steven reacted in one of two ways. They became excited, or they became respectful. This man did neither. He approached without hesitation, no greeting, no polite smile, just a stare that lasted a little too long. The music continued playing, but it felt quieter now. Conversations faded. The air seemed thicker, like the room was holding its breath. Steven didn't break eye contact. He didn't look away, but he didn't challenge either. He simply waited. Silence can do two things. It can calm a situation, or it can force someone to fill it. The man chose to fill it. His first comment wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted, but it carried an edge sharp enough to be heard across the counter. Not a question about books, not even curiosity. It was personal, the kind of remark designed to poke at reputation. A few customers shifted in their seats. The older couple stopped flipping pages. The student near the poetry shelf glanced toward the door, calculating distance without even realizing it. Steven's expression didn't change. He rested one hand lightly on the counter. Calm. Still. The man leaned closer, pushing the boundary just enough to test it. His voice rose slightly this time, not yelling, just louder than the space required. That's when the mood changed completely. You could feel the invisible line in the room. Before that moment, it was a bookstore. After that moment, it was a situation. Steven stepped out from behind the counter slowly. Not rushed, not aggressive. Just deliberate movement. Each step controlled, balanced. He didn't square up. He didn't puff his chest. He simply closed the distance enough to remove the barrier between them. And barriers matter. When there's a counter between two people, there's safety, structure. When that counter is no longer the divider, everything becomes more direct. The man smirked slightly, as if expecting a reaction, expecting noise, maybe even hoping for it. But Steven didn't raise his voice. Instead, he glanced briefly toward the customers. That look said everything. Step back. Not panic, just space. The older couple stood first, then the student. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as people moved toward the walls without being told twice. The room rearranged itself in seconds. Now there were only two figures standing in the center aisle. The music was still playing, but no one was listening anymore. There's a moment in every tense situation when things can still go either way. It hadn't reached that point yet. Not fully. The man stood a few feet away now, no counter between them, no shelves blocking the view. Just open space in the middle of a quiet bookstore that no longer felt quiet. Steven's voice, when he finally spoke, was calm, low controlled, not confrontational. Not defensive, just direct. He didn't respond to the insult, he didn't address the tone. Instead, he asked a simple question. What exactly was the man looking for? It wasn't sarcasm, it wasn't bait, it was clarity, but clarity doesn't always calm someone who came in looking for friction. The man laughed under his breath, a short, dismissive sound. He took one step closer. Close enough that the tension shifted from uncomfortable to deliberate. And then he crossed the line. Not with a swing, not with a shove, with words. He challenged the calm, mocked the setting, turned the room itself into part of the provocation. He wasn't there to buy a book. He was there to create a moment. The customers near the walls felt it instantly. You can always tell when someone is testing boundaries on purpose. The body language changes. The voice sharpens. The posture stiffens. Steven didn't flinch. But something changed in his eyes. Not anger. Assessment. He glanced once more toward the darker, still unlocked, still open to the street, and that's when he made a decision. He didn't announce it, didn't make a scene. He walked past the man calmly, not breaking eye contact for long. The man half-turned, confused for a second, unsure whether that movement meant retreat or strategy. Steven reached the entrance and turned the lock. The click was soft, but in that silence, it sounded final. The message was clear. No one else was coming in. No one else was walking out in a rush either. The bookstore was now contained, a controlled environment. The man's smirk faded slightly, because locking a door isn't aggression. It's control. Steven didn't rush back to the center of the room. He walked at the same steady pace, placing himself again in front of the man, but this time the space felt different, smaller, more focused. "You're not here for books," he said evenly. It wasn't a question. The man's voice rose, trying to reclaim dominance, trying to regain that edge. He stepped closer again, too close now. That was the second line. Physical space. Steven didn't step back. He didn't push forward either. He simply adjusted his stance. Subtle, balanced, grounded. Years of discipline don't disappear. They sit quietly beneath the surface, waiting to be used only if necessary. The man's hand moved, not striking, not yet, but gesturing aggressively enough to be intentional. And that was it. The third line. Steven's tone shifted just slightly. Still calm, but firmer. Lower your voice. Not shouted, not barked, just stated. Authority doesn't need volume. The customers along the walls were completely silent now. No phones raised, no whispers, just watching, because this wasn't chaos. It was containment. The man hesitated for the first time since entering. Confidence feels different when it meets something immovable, and Steven wasn't reacting emotionally. He was setting boundaries. Clear ones, the kind that don't leave room for confusion. The line had been crossed, but it wasn't going to spiral. Not in this room, not today. The room didn't explode. It didn't turn chaotic. It tightened. That's the difference. The man stood there, breathing a little heavier now. Not exhausted, not afraid, but no longer fully in control of the moment. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw locked. His pride was doing most of the talking now. Steven, on the other hand, looked exactly the same as he did 5 minutes earlier. Steady breathing, relaxed shoulders, hands open at his sides. That contrast was the real tension, because pressure reveals people. The man tried again, stepping closer, voice raised, throwing another sharp remark meant to provoke. It was louder this time, more aggressive, designed to spark a reaction. But Steven didn't react. He absorbed it. There's something unsettling about yelling at someone who refuses to yell back. It makes the noise feel empty. It exposes it. The customers against the walls watched carefully. They weren't seeing a fight. They were watching restraint. The man moved suddenly, not a punch, not yet, but a fast, aggressive gesture meant to intimidate. He stepped into Steven's space again, testing that invisible boundary one more Time Steven shifted his weight. That was it. No dramatic stance, no flashy movement. Just a small adjustment. Balanced, grounded, ready if necessary. His eyes never left the man's, and then he spoke, slowly, clearly. You don't want this to go where you think it does. Not a threat, a fact. The man hesitated, just for a second. But it was visible, because deep down he knew. Noise looks powerful from a distance. Up close it's unstable. Steven's voice remained calm. His posture remained relaxed. But there was something unmovable about him now. Not aggressive, not angry, certain. That certainty began to drain the room of chaos. The man tried one final push, a light shove against Steven's shoulder. Not strong. Enough to knock him back, just enough to cross from words into action. That was the moment everyone braced for. But Steven didn't shove back, he didn't swing, he didn't escalate. He caught the man's wrist. Smooth, controlled, precise. No struggle. No dramatic slam. Just a firm hold that stopped the movement instantly. The shift in power was immediate. The man tried to pull back. He couldn't. Steven leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only the man could hear him. Walk. Out. 3 simple words. No anger, no emotion. Just instruction. For the first time since entering the bookstore, the man looked uncertain. Pride fought with logic. Ego wrestled with reality. Steven released his wrist. Not violently. Not as a warning. But as a choice. The door was still locked behind them. And everyone in the room understood something in that moment. Control isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. The man looked around. At the silent witnesses. At the locked door. At the calm figure standing in front of him. And something shifted. He stepped back. Then another step. No apology. No dramatic speech. Just retreat. Steven walked back to the door, unlocked it calmly, and stepped aside. No celebration, no smirk, no victory pose. The man left. The bell above the door rang again, softer this time. The tension drained out of the room slowly, like air leaving a sealed space. Customers began breathing, normally again. Chairs moved back into place. The music felt audible once more. Steven returned behind the counter as if nothing had happened. Because to him, it hadn't been about dominance. It had been about boundaries. And that leads to one question. Do you think real strength shows more in silence than in noise? The bookstore was quiet again, but the air was charged. Everyone could feel it. That invisible tension that lingers after a storm has passed. Steven moved behind the counter, arranging books with calm precision, his movements deliberate but effortless. There was no hurry, no display of urgency, just the steady rhythm of a man who knows exactly who he is. The customer who had caused the earlier disruption lingered near the doorway, shoulders tight, eyes flicking between the rows of books and Steven. He wanted to provoke, to reclaim some semblance of control, but he had already felt the difference between noise and restraint was heavier, denser, and harder to challenge. Steven glanced up, briefly locking eyes with the man. That brief contact carried more weight than words could ever manage. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention, but it spoke volumes. Power isn't about showing it. It's about making others recognize it without effort. The man shifted, trying to regain composure. His movements were quick, sharp, desperate, but Steven didn't move. His posture was solid, grounded, unwavering. Every inch of his presence was a statement. I am in control. Then the man tried something different. A soft, sarcastic remark intended to unsettle Steven. He smirked, thinking he could push the boundaries one last time. But Steven didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even blink twice. The words hit a wall of calm so thick it was almost physical. The customers began noticing the subtle signs of dominance. How a single man could command a room without shouting. How control could be measured not in volume, but in stillness. The tension didn't dissolve, but it shifted. It became contained, manageable, almost respectful. Steven finally spoke, his voice low, steady, and unmistakably authoritative. "This store is a place for learning, not chaos. Choose wisely." The words were simple, direct, but every syllable carried weight. The man hesitated. He realized the truth, that the power in this room wasn't about fists or threats. It was about composure, boundaries, quiet authority. He backed off slightly, eyes narrowing, trying to analyze, trying to reclaim something he couldn't measure. But the realization was sinking in. This was not a man who reacted out of anger. This was a man who chose the moment of action with precision. Steven returned to his task, his hands brushing over the books, carefully straightening titles. His calm presence filled the room. The man at the doorway stepped back again, uncertainty creeping into his movements. No words, no action, just recognition of the control he could not touch. And in that moment, the bookstore felt entirely different. It wasn't just a place to browse books, it was a testament to silent power, to restraint, to the idea that strength doesn't always announce itself with noise. For a brief second, the room seemed to exhale, and everyone who witnessed it understood something fundamental. The real control isn't taken. It's claimed quietly, decisively, and without fanfare. The air had finally settled. Steven had locked the doors, taken control of the storm, and now the bookstore felt like a sanctuary once again. The lingering tension had faded, replaced by a sense of cautious curiosity from the remaining customers. They watched him, wondering how one man could calm chaos without a single shout. Once the door was unlocked, Steven moved to welcome those who had stayed, greeting them with a nod and a quiet smile. There was no drama in his movements, no lingering anger from the earlier incident. His composure remained unbroken, a silent lesson in the art of measured response. The shelves seemed brighter now, as if the atmosphere itself had been cleansed. Every book, every corner of the store felt more intentional. The customers began to relax, pulling titles from the shelves, flipping pages, and speaking in soft voices. There was a new sense of respect, not just for Steven, but for the space he had created, a space where knowledge and calm coexist. The man who had caused the disruption earlier had left, but his shadow lingered in the minds of everyone present. It was a reminder that challenges come when least expected, testing patience, strength, and resolve. And yet what everyone noticed most was not the confrontation itself, but how Steven had handled it. No overreaction, no spectacle, just control. Steven moved quietly through the aisles, arranging books and offering subtle guidance when asked. He answered questions with clarity, never condescension. His presence was a steady anchor in an otherwise ordinary day, showing that authority doesn't need to be loud to be respected. Conversations slowly resumed, punctuated by soft laughter and whispered recommendations. The energy in the room was different now, tempered by the understanding that respect is earned through action, not words. The bookstore was no longer just a place to browse. It was a lesson in patience, quiet strength, and deliberate choice. A young woman approached Steven, curiosity written across her face. She had witnessed the entire incident and couldn't help but ask quietly, "How do you stay so calm when someone tries to push your buttons?" Steven looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, then simply said, "Calm is the strongest. Armor. Everything else is reaction." The words hung in the air, sinking deep into the minds of those nearby. They weren't just about this bookstore. They were about life. About choosing which battles matter and which ones are best left unfought. The store began to hum with quiet life again. Customers wandered, books were exchanged, and the sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating the neat rows of titles. Every movement seemed purposeful, every glance deliberate. It was clear that order had been restored, not by force, but by the steady hand of someone who understood that true control lies in restraint. When someone tries to provoke you publicly, is walking away the strongest move or the weakest?